I like trains.
The first foreign power I ever caught was on September 30th, 2020. On this day, I was on the old main line where I had already caught a pair of eastbounds, Q372 first, and then a CSX loaded coal. Now this train featured in this video, CSX K630, is a loaded ethanol train that goes from Chicago to Curtis Bay in Baltimore. K630 originates from the Canadian Pacific Yard, which is why it typically has CP power. Now this particular K630 actually was sitting in Brunswick for about 5 days before it finally decided to leave, and luckily for me, I was on the old main line the day it left. So this definitely came by as a surprise, even though we knew it was possibly on the way. This K630 consisted of a pair of Canadian Pacific GE ES44ACs. No CSX power here, and this marks the first foreign power I have ever seen.
Oh, what an idiot. That is a Canadian Pacific locomotive. Let's go, man! Sorry for foaming. Dude. Oh my gosh, 8888. It's the Crazy HGE.
The next foreign power I ended up seeing came on October 16th, 2020. This day ended up being pretty special. On this day, I decided to rail fan in Brunswick for two main reasons. This was the first. Well, this doesn't feature an actual train, it features the power of a train, a loaded grain train by the ID of CSX G089, which originates in North Dakota and goes all the way to Brunswick. It goes back west as V089. For some reason, CSX decided to change the ID of this grain train to GNV124. On this particular G089, the consist has something pretty special on it. A Kansas City Southern EMD SD70 Ace number 4140, and then behind it, BNSF 4119, a GEC 44-9W. Seeing Kansas City Southern power in our area is very rare, so I was very glad to see this, even though I didn't see it on a moving train. I didn't have to wait long at all to see the next foreign power on this list. In fact, I only had to wait another hour. This was the other reason why I went to Brunswick on this day, to catch CSX K630 yet again, a loaded ethanol train. However, this K630, in particular, had something extra special as pictured right there. That locomotive, Canadian Pacific 7017, is an EMD SD70 ACU painted in the maroon and gray block scheme. It is one of Canadian Pacific's few heritage units, so the fact that it's a heritage unit plus foreign power on a CSX train makes it extra special. There's the other part of foreign power on this loaded ethanol train, Canadian Pacific 8956, a GE ES44AC. This K630 also had a pair of CSX locomotives, CSX 3310, a GE ET44AH leading with a K5LA, and CSX 873 is pictured right there, a GE ES44AH. This is one of my favorite catches of all time.
Here comes the CSX. This is crazy. Here it comes. There goes the car. Here it is. Look at this. Oh wow, look how the locomotives are. Huh. How about that, guys?
After about 3 months of waiting, I finally got my next chance to catch some foreign power. This time on the ID Q332, a manifest train that goes from Avon, Indiana all the way to Philadelphia, or at least it did at this time. From November to January, CSX IDs Q372 and Q371 were temporarily abolished due to COVID-19, and ID's Q332 and Q331 extended their routes all the way to Philadelphia and back to Avon, Indiana. This particular Q332 had a rare locomotive in its consist, as pictured right there, Canadian National and XGT 4621, an EMD GP9R. This locomotive currently belongs to the railroad CLNA, or Carolina Coastal. This Q332 actually ended up dropping its consist in the Avalon siding on the old main line, so when it passed us at St. Denis, it was only light power, but still very cool to catch. What a way to start 2021! On December 30th, I got word that we had a loaded ethanol train coming, a different one, this time by the ID of K676. K676 is a loaded ethanol train that, like K630, goes from Chicago to Baltimore. However, K676 belongs to Canadian National, so it typically has Canadian National power. This was the first Canadian National power I had ever caught, as the train had a pair of Canadian National EMD SD75Is in the lead, followed by a pair of CSX GE AC44CWs. Now, this train actually tied down in Brunswick on New Year's Eve and ended up starting back up again on January the 2nd, which I ended up catching at Morgan Road on the old main line. This was one of my favorite catches, as not only did we have EMD power leading, but it was foreign power, and like I said, the first Canadian National locomotives I ever saw. "15 days later, I ended up catching another K676 with a pair of Canadian National locomotives. This time, the Canadian National locomotives were both GEs. The lead locomotive, Canadian National 2320, is a GE ES44DC. The other Canadian National locomotive in this consist was Canadian National 2156, a GE C40-8W, the first -8 I ever saw, pictured right there. CN 2156 is an ex-ATSF war bonnet, ex-ATSF number 842. The CSX locomotive on this K676, this picture right there, was CSX 126, a GE AC44CW in YN2 paint. So this was definitely a pretty cool catch. Now keep those two Canadian National locomotives in mind, as I may have caught it the next day. Well, I told you I would see these locomotives again shortly. In fact, I saw them the very next day. On this day, January 18th, the day after I caught K676 with a pair of CNGEs, I got an alert that K677 was on the way, passing through Relay just west of St. Denis, and taking the old main line with the same CN power on it. However, this time, the Dash 8 CN 2156 was leading the train, which made it extra special. This is likely the first Dash 8 to lead a train on the old main in around 2 years or so. I'm not sure how accurate that is. They also took off the CSX locomotive from this consist, so it was just purely CN power. Also note to self the RS3L train horn on CN 2156. This was one of the most unique train horns and quite possibly the quietest train horn I've ever heard. So this was definitely a very cool catch of mine. Next up, we got a trio of BNSF locomotives on CSX V124 on March 5th, 2021 at Cherry Run, West Virginia. This was the first time I ever saw a BNSF locomotive on a moving train, so I was very glad to catch this. While BNSF power is very common for the ID G and V124, it still counts as foreign power, and I absolutely love BNSF. I almost didn't catch this train, as it ended up leaving Brunswick at a very early time, so I had to go very far west to catch it. I ended up going to Cherry Run for the very first time to catch it, and I have absolutely no regrets. The BNSF locomotives here was BNSF 7156, a GE ES44C4, BNSF 4162, a GE C44-9W, and BNSF 8257, a GE ES44C4. "13 days later, I was notified that there was another K676 on the way with a pair of Canadian National EMD SD70M-2s. While they ended up putting a CSX AC44CW in front of those locomotives, this was still a cool train to catch. I ended up catching this train at Morgan Station Road on the old main line, as I did with the previous two K676s I had caught. I ended up catching this in a slightly different spot at Morgan Station Road, this time with the help of a few friends providing light. Now, for those that don't remember, this train actually went into emergency as it struck a large tree branch on the old main line close to the Woodbine tunnel. This was quite the sight to see, as it was the first time I ever caught a train going into emergency, and it just so happened that it had foreign power on it.
It's K676.
last but not least, we got CSX K638 tied down on April 7, 2021. K638, an ID we've never really heard of before, is a loaded ethanol train that goes from Proviso, Indiana to Curtis Bay Yard in Baltimore, and it comes out of Union Pacific Yard, so it kind of makes sense that it had UP power. This is the first Union Pacific locomotive to go on the old main line in the Cumberland sub since July of 2020, so Union Pacific power on CSX tracks is pretty uncommon, and this is also the first time I had ever seen Union Pacific power. Now, this train itself passed my area in Woodbine around 3:34 a.m. on April the 5th. However, it got tied down on the Avalon siding, so on April the 7th, I was able to walk down to the tracks to see it. The power on this train is Union Pacific 6634, a GE AC44CW, and Union Pacific 7384, a GE AC45CCTE. Thank you all for watching this video. This is the Old Man Guy signing off.